Hi everyone. So I think I've spent enough time with the HTC One M8 camera now to kind of offer you some thoughts on what I'm really seeing here. Now overall it is a very good camera and it's incredibly versatile, but there's a few decisions that HTC made here which confuse me slightly. They don't seem to have been made for what I would sort of describe as a clear consumer business case. So, you know, for instance, the HTC One M8 does not feature optical image stabilization, unlike its sibling, the M7, which does. Now, this is a really puzzling thing because high-end smartphones, you know, the flagship smartphone these days, you will not find one without optical image stabilization. So the question is, why on earth did HTC decide to remove one of the most important features from modern cameras, an ability to automatically stabilize the image using hardware, not a software process, and take it out? There doesn't really seem to be any logical reason other than a supply constraint. They simply couldn't get hold of the optics. Not enough. Apple apparently is taking all of them at the moment, and suppliers simply will not give HTC the products that they're looking for to put into their smartphones. Now, ultimately, what that means is HTC had a decision to make. If they'd have launched the 4 ultra-pixel camera without optical image stabilization, they'd have been laughed at by everybody. And some people are laughing at them. I'm mildly amused they would do this, but ultimately, moving to a duo camera system acted as a little bit of a kind of smoke and mirrors. Well, with one hand we take this away, but with one other hand we give you this, and oh look, 3D effects. But ultimately, that loss of optical image stabilization, you can feel it in the images. Certainly when I've compared to old shots taken on the M7 in very similar conditions, what I found was the lack of sharpness on the M8 is slightly disturbing. And ultimately that does come down to the fact that those small little micro vibrations from your hand when you're taking the image just allow for a small amount of additional blur if you don't have the optical image stabilization there. If you do, then you tend to get what we class as pin-sharp images, as long as you're not massively shaking your hands anyway. And again, we can also see this in video footage as well. A chap on YouTube has done a really excellent test where he took the M7, he took the M8, and then he ran through an airport whilst obviously filming. And you can see quite clearly that the M7 provides far superior video because it's not massively shaky. Obviously he's walking or running through this airport. There is a small amount of shake on the M7. You can see some movement, but not like the M8 where it's just a juddery mess. Ultimately, if you love video, don't buy the M8. It's as simple as that, because for any opportunity where you're recording video, you have to have optical image stabilization if you want anything like a decent image. This especially comes into play with any fast panning shots you might do as well. Ultimately, I like what the M8 is doing from a camera point of view in some areas, but that's only really down to the features that come from the duo camera. They're cool, they're kind of quirky. They don't have any value beyond the camera, beyond the smartphone at the moment, which is a real shame. What I don't like about the HTC One M8 camera is the general lack of sharpness in the images. You have to go in and add that back in through a digital process. So you can go in and tweak that in the advanced settings, but I believe that is basically applied after the image is taken. It's digital sharpening. Likewise, the colour and saturation are awful out of the box. Again, you need to go in and you need to notch those up a few to get something that actually feels like it has any life at all. Now, in part, HTC may very well have done this to make their camera filters appear more wowy and zingy. It's well known within photography circles that if you shoot your image as flat as possible, i.e. knocking out as much of the colour and saturation as possible at the time where you shoot the image, you can then add that back in later and you have a lot more control. Likewise, any filters you might apply will generally have a easier time because they're not having to deal with, you know, loads of saturation in one area particularly, and you know, you get a much more even effect from the filters. So it could very well be that that's what HTC decided to do here. Now, the problem with that is, if you're the kind of person who likes to snap and share, the images that you're quickly snapping and sharing to Facebook look awful. Plus the fact that Facebook then mangles your images anyway. So ultimately you need to go in there and you do need to tweak those settings to make sure that you're getting really the best point and shoot quality possible. If you're the sort of person who just likes to apply filters later, fair enough, leave it flat and you'll get overall better results. Now let's talk about that low light performance, because this is an area where HTC always has excelled, certainly over the One range of devices, and the same is true here. This still offers the best low light performance you will find on any smartphone. Period, full stop, end of story. if you like low light photography, or if you're looking for a camera that provides the greatest sort of dynamic range of photography opportunities, you know, shooting in good light, shooting in low light, then the HTC One M8 has it in spades. That loss of the optical image stabilization, though, does compromise slightly its abilities under low light conditions, unfortunately allowing for just a little bit more kind of shaky fuzz, unfortunately. This becomes even more important as obviously when you're trying to focus in low light conditions, you kind of need to be metering really well. That's difficult if it's not quite able to focus properly because there's just a little bit of extra shake there. The aperture in the lens is being opened up fully to, I think it's f2.8 for this particular one. You're going to end up getting just a little bit more perceivable shake in there, and that does have a slight impact on the quality of the images. Images appear softer in low light than they did on the HTC One M7 in my opinion. But overall, the fact that this camera is even capable of taking pictures in low light, if we were to put something like the S4, Nexus 5, LG's phones, Sony's phones in a similar kind of test, all we would generally see is a smudge. That's if it even took the picture, because in most cases it would simply say, too dark, turn the flash on. It's like, well, this actually, I can think of only one occasion so far where I turned the flash on. That simple as that. Only one occasion where I needed to turn the flash on to take a picture in low light conditions. That is a remarkable thing. For my mind, whilst HTC have delivered a somewhat compromised camera system here, it isn't a material impact necessarily on the quality of the images you're going to get in most scenarios. My kind of testing tends to be in a little bit more of the extremes. I tend to be looking for those opportunities to show where the camera has some limitations. But ultimately, if you're looking for an all-round shooter, the HTC One M8 is a very fine option, especially because of that low light performance. It does suffer now from having only 4 ultra pixels, which only gives you an image resolution of something around 2000 pixels, which ultimately these days is starting to look a little old school. I actually remember buying my first digital camera, digital point and shoot, and had 3.4 megapixels on it. Now, fair enough, we're dealing with ultra pixels here, but that lens was also an f2.8. So you can see that that was nearly 15 years ago. We have a very similar optical arrangement in some respects to a high-end point and shoot camera from 15 years ago that was digital. Very, very similar resolution, same amount of light coming in, etc. So it's quite an interesting one that HTC might be saying that these sensors are better in a camera, in a smartphone, but ultimately if you were actually to put that same optics into a camera today, you would get laughed at. So it's a very interesting issue for HTC really. 4 ultra pixels, the resolution they're working with, will not hold HTC in good stead in 2015. It may not hold them in good stead by the mid part of this year if Samsung's ISOCELL technology turns out to be quite a hit. ISOCELL technology, again, it rearranges the way the optics and sensors work so that more light is able to actually reach the sensor. Now, we don't know yet whether that is going to make a massive difference in low light performance for Samsung, but certainly an increase of even 5 to 10% additional light may very well bring the S5 within range of low light performance, similar but not identical to the HTC One. Now, just speaking again about the HTC One's kind of image quality, one of the things that we found slightly disturbing really is the amount of noise that has found its way into the images this time. Personally, I think this is going to be something the HTC want to look at and maybe patch post-release, because ultimately these images are noisy. Even in good light, these images are noisy, and there is a certain amount of detectable purple fringing going on as well, something that we've seen unfortunately as an overheating issue around the camera. I've only seen it in very, very minute amounts, and in part it could be caused by a diffusion of light hitting whatever the actual lens cover is over the top of the optics, but ultimately there is just a small fraction of purple fringing. If that annoyed you last time, it's still there, but not as bad. So we've been sprinkling some of the images that we've taken on the HTC One M8 throughout this video so that you can get a bit of a sense for how they look. Now obviously YouTube, we have to reduce the images to 1080p, so they have been compressed, then they've been mangled through the fact that they've gone through a video process and YouTube. So if you look in the description, you'll be able to find a set of links. Those are pointing to where all of the images are on our Google Plus page, and we've turned off Auto Awesome on all of those images as well. So what you're seeing is as close as possible to what I'm seeing on my device. However, do bear in mind that the way that processing images online works, you may see some additional noise and so on that wasn't there in the original image. But I can assure you the original images do feature a certain amount of noise and futziness, I would say, within the pixels that is just not too pleasing. Normally, if we had that kind of situation, we would reduce the resolution of the image, thus compacting the pixels a bit, helping to sharpen everything up and remove some of that noise. But ultimately here, we don't have that kind of resolution with the HTC One M8. You have very little cropping room, unfortunately, with this camera. And so, unfortunately, you also have very little resizing room as well to try and improve the density of those images. But ultimately, I like what HTC have done here. I question why they removed optical image stabilization, because for my mind, if you're a flagship phone and you don't have that, well, you're not a flagship phone. Sorry, but you're not. It's kind of a benchmark in the ground now, a line in the sand as to what we consider to be acceptable optics. Now, ultimately, HTC have managed to kind of work their way around that with some software processing, the addition of the duo camera, but you can feel it, and especially in video footage, it is not nice, the loss of that optical image stabilization, I'm afraid. We hope you enjoyed this video. Do please remember to like and comment, and if you'd like to, please subscribe. You can also visit our website and download our Android app. If you do subscribe, you'll be getting a daily dose of the latest tech news, hardware reviews, Android games, consoles, and basically an honest opinion direct from the UK. Stay tuned, stay Androidizen.